Hi everyone, I'm Eleanor Glenn, Co-Director of Common Cause Australia.
And hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Pilgrim, and I'm the CEO of Victoria Walks. Welcome to our video on safer speeds and local streets. This video is one of a series to support you through your journey towards introducing safer speeds in your area, and we'll cover conversations and objection handling.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to give you some background, just a brief summary of what we've put here in the Conversations and Objection Handling Guide. And then Sarah and I are going to demonstrate how you might respond to some of these objections to safer speeds. We start the guide with a two-step process for identifying which objections you might want to respond to and which you might not. You will probably receive private objections as well as public. So hearing from people who aren't fully on board with safer speeds. Private objections are those not aired publicly. So if someone picks up the phone to you or is at the customer service desk, or they might have responded to your Have Your Say consultation website, and written correspondence as well. So normally you would need to respond to these. For public objections, for example, on social media, you might want to decide whether or not to respond to those objections to safer speeds. Just note that there can be a cost to publicly addressing objections if you give those objections extra airtime or attention. For example, if you make them prominent in a FAQ section or in social media, if you respond in a certain way and it then encourages further debate and conversation about that point rather than just letting it go. However, there are some objections that you can easily dispel and shift using our frame of Streets Are for Everyone. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. So step two is working out, okay, well, we want to pivot responses to our frame. What does that look like? How do we do that? And in summary, there's 4 tips here. So the first one is to stick to script. Keep to that message of streets are for everyone who uses our local streets. And I really encourage you just to practice a few lines so that they roll off the tongue when you have those conversations. The second one is streets, not individuals. So this is about keeping the responses about the type of street environments that enable safer streets for everybody. Really, that's what 40 and 30 kilometres an hour are really about. And avoid blaming people who are driving or anyone else for that matter. The third tip is to avoid myth busting and negation. So negation just means saying what something is not. For example, in this first objection, we'll run through about potholes being the answer. Don't repeat that objection and say fixing potholes is not the answer. So just go straight to your frame, straight to your point of view. Your tone is very important. So it's the fourth and final tip. So people will not necessarily remember all the details of what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. So it's about obviously avoiding, that sort of lecturing tone or implying that someone's wrong or criticism. Instead, just present your point of view. Just present it openly, clearly, constructively. Depending on your personality, that might be quite neutral or it might be very passionate. That's fine. It's just about presenting that really positive central idea of streets for everyone and what that looks like in terms of safer speeds. So either way, it's about getting across streets for everyone.
And I think if I can just cut in there, Eleanor, I think it's also important that you remember this is about you at work. So it's not about you personally. You might be somebody who's a passionate bike rider or a walker, but this is about you at work. And it's always that customer care thing of remembering that the customer's talking about council as a bigger thing and not you as a person. So keeping that in your mind with what you choose to use in your response to the customer.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. So just before we dive into our objections, I wanted to give an example of a common pitfall, which is to hear something in an unhelpful frame and respond within that frame rather than pivoting to our helpful frame. So you might hear an objection within that opposing frame of roads are for cars and also opposing frames around personal responsibility, especially blaming people walking and riding. So someone might say to you, pedestrians shouldn't use their phone while walking. Bring back personal responsibility for safety. So kind of implying we don't need 40 and 30, we just need people off their phones. So a defensive response that we wouldn't recommend, still within that personal responsibility frame, but shifting to blaming people driving, might be many drivers also use their phones while driving. They also need to be more responsible. So that kind of argument doesn't get us very far, doesn't sort of shift to the solutions, which is where we do want to get the conversation. So that helpful response that pivots to streets are for everyone might look like this. Safer speeds are about creating safer street environments for everyone, whether we're 8 years old or 80, whether we can see well or not at all, whether we can walk fast or slow. So yes, staying off phones is an important safety measure, but that's not what we're focusing on here. We're talking about creating safer streets for all. So again, that street environment is where we want to take the conversation. All right, so we're going to do our little role play here where Sarah is someone who's not too keen on the idea of a 40 or 30 kilometre an hour zone that you might have proposed in council. So I'll throw over to Sarah with one of these objections that you might hear.
Okay, well, thank you. I read your memo about 30 and 40 Ks, and I don't like it. And I've just come in because I really think, council should just fix the potholes and build road humps, and that'll do far more for the safety of pedestrians than slowing everybody down.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. Yes, there's many measures that can make our streets safer. Safer streets are the cornerstone of road safety, or they're the foundation for a whole range of road safety measures to work well. For example, pedestrian crossings work better when drivers have enough time to slow down and see people crossing and to stop in time. Now, and this second part is if you are actually implementing, package of measures. We're implementing safer speeds as part of a package of road safety measures. That includes fixing potholes as well as building speed humps where there's a history of speeding. So yeah, hear what you say, and it's safer speeds that will make all of this work a lot better. And this is if you're not going to put any street treatments in. Safer speeds of 40 and 30 k an hour create safer, calmer conditions for walking, riding and driving, regardless of whether there are any speed humps or other traffic calming measures in place.
Yeah, okay. I'm still not convinced. I think that you should build more pedestrian crossings or bike lanes. The roads are for cars. People walking shouldn't be on the roads.
Well, at council, we can see streets are for everybody. Everyone deserves to move around our streets safely, whether we're walking, riding, or driving. And in our huge network of local streets, it's often not feasible to put in a crossing at every single street intersection. Also, there's often not enough space for bike paths on these streets. So safely sharing our streets requires everyone to be patient and look out for each other, which is obviously much easier for us to do in 40 and 30 kilometre an hour zones.
I get what you're talking about, but this actually only benefits a few people. Like, not everybody's on the pavement. And council should focus on the things that benefit the majority of the people in the council. I mean, everybody pays rates. Now, before Eleanor responds, what I'd encourage you to do is just press pause on the video and write down a couple of ways you might respond to me before you hear Eleanor's. Okay, Eleanor, let's see how you'll deal with Mrs. Grumpy.
Okay, so I would bring it back to council's responsibility to plan for everyone in the community and keep everyone safe. You could just say those words or something like this. At name of council, one of our jobs is to help keep everyone in our community safe. That's why we're rolling out safer speeds. Obviously, calling it safer speeds, as we always do, helps with that idea. If I wanted to get a bit more evocative and particularly highlight children, older people, and people with disability, because we know through the focus groups and our survey that they tend to get people thinking about other people and how many people in our community can benefit. So back to Sarah's question about, is this just a few people niche thing? No, it's for everybody. So when we plan for the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old, we're also planning for parents with prams, blind people, and someone using crutches. Safer speeds are for everyone in our community.
I hear that, but I'm worried about myself. It feels really slow and there's a risk that I'll speed. And I'm a really busy person. Like I've got a lot to do in a day, and this just makes my journey so much longer. Okay. Again, why don't we pause for a second and write down how you're going to deal with that objection from me? All right, Eleanor, show us what you've got.
Okay, so as always, no surprise, we will lead with people and safety, our core idea of caring for each other and safety. And then we pivot to that simple explanation about journey times. So something like this. Let's remember safer speed zones save lives and dramatically reduce crashes and injuries. In our location, the safer speed zone will have very little impact on car journey times. That's because drivers already travel quite slowly here as they slow for turns in parking and stop at intersections and traffic lights. The streets are really well suited to 40 and 30 kilometres an hour. So we're doing two things here. We're explaining why in a really simple common sense way, because we've probably all had experience of if there's cars reversing to park and coming out and people crossing and uh, pedestrian crossings, traffic lights, all of those mean that we travel more slowly. And the streets that councils choose for 40 and 30, often cars are, so people are driving a little slower there as well. So giving an explanation that feels like common sense. If you have a longer conversation with someone, you could link to this idea. So we've all probably experienced a car driver hooning by only to stop at the red traffic light next to us. So again, just reinforcing that sort of common sense idea of why it actually has little impact on journey times. And yeah, reinforcing that the streets are well suited to 40 and 30 when there's all this activity and when we already travel fairly slowly.
Great. Well, safer speeds, they're not really needed. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've only heard of one crash in that street. How has council decided that it's a good idea and that this is necessary?
Yeah, now I hear what you say about crashes. So crashes really matter because of the often devastating impact they can have on people's lives. It's clear many crashes can be prevented just by driving a little slower. So for example, and name this specific area, where you have already got 40 or 30, crashes were halved after the speed limit was changed from 50 to 40. So in many councils, you will already have some data from 50 to 40, or feel free to use if there's a surrounding place that's done this. It doesn't necessarily have to be in your council area. If you've got, again, a bit more time with someone, a longer response might sound like this. It's not only crashes, but near misses that suggest to potential riders and walkers that a street is unsafe. If we want to create streets where kids can walk and ride to school and people of all ages and abilities feel comfortable walking and riding throughout our huge network of streets, then safer speeds are essential. So again, just a little way to weave in these ideas that people find quite compelling about kids being able to walk and ride by themselves. And for people of all ages and abilities, again.
Great. And in fact, there's a really good little video that's just come out from Infrastructure Victoria, and I'll pop a link to that in the back end of this as well, Eleanor, that has two jelly beans and the story that you were just talking about. So that might also help people fill out their knowledge.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And thanks for being our objector, Sarah. Hope
Thank
this
you.
video has helped you. to have better conversations about safer speeds or to respond in writing to written objections or social media comments. Thanks.